I took a job as a night caretaker. The list of rules should have been my first warning. By silent screams. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The ad was buried in the back pages of a free student newspaper, the kind you grab without thinking, and later use as a coaster. 3 lines of stark, black text. No logos, no frills. It read, "Night custodian required for private collection. No experience necessary, must be diligent and able to follow instructions precisely. Excellent compensation." Excellent compensation was the part that hooked me. I was a third-year literature student, and my diet had recently devolved into a grim rotation of instant noodles and regret. My student loans were a mountain, and the part-time job I had at a coffee shop barely covered my rent. I was desperate, and excellent compensation sounded like a lifeline. I called the number. A thin, reedy voice answered on the first ring. "Alistair." I explained I was calling about the ad. He asked me a few blunt questions. Was I a student? Yes. Was I in good health? Yes. Was I afraid of the dark? I hesitated, then laughed it off. "No, of course not." "Good," he said, a dry rustle in his voice. "Fear is counterproductive. Be at this address tomorrow at 9 p.m. Do not be late." He gave me an address out in the industrial park, a part of town that was little more than a ghost town after dark. Then he hung up. The next evening I found the address. It was a massive, windowless warehouse, a featureless block of corrugated metal and concrete tucked away at the end of a deserted street. A single, bare bulb flickered over a steel door, the only entrance I could see. I checked my watch. 8:59 p.m. As my hand reached for the door, it swung inward. With a low groan, standing there was the frailest man I had ever seen. He was ancient, his skin like parchment stretched over a bird's skull. He wore a perfectly tailored but old-fashioned 3-piece suit. "This had to be Mr. Alistair. You are punctual," he stated, his eyes a pale, watery blue. "Come in." The inside of the warehouse was cavernous and cold. The air was thick with the smell of dust, old fabric, and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers and chemicals. But it was what filled the space that made my breath catch in my throat. Mannequins. There must have been hundreds of them. They weren't the cheap, plastic kind you see in department stores. These were antiques, arranged in elaborate scenes under pools of stark, theatrical lighting. In one section, Victorian figures in crumbling lace dresses and top hats sat around. A silent dinner party. In another, a group of unnervingly realistic porcelain children played with rusted toys in a mock nursery. There were flappers from the 20s, soldiers in faded uniforms, and a single, terrifying figure of a court jester with a manic, painted-on grin, holding a scepter with bells that I knew, instinctively, would never ring. The sheer, silent multitude of them was overwhelming. Their glass eyes seemed to watch my every move. "This is the collection," Mr. Alistair said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Your job is to be its caretaker. From 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. You will not leave the premises during your shift. You will reside in the security office." He led me to a small, glass-walled office in the center of the warehouse. Inside was a large steel desk, a comfortable-looking chair, and a bank of security monitors, each showing a different, static view of the silent inhabitants. "Your duties are simple," he continued, pulling a laminated sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. "But they require your absolute adherence. These are the rules. They are for your own safety and for the integrity of the collection. You must learn them. You must obey them. No exceptions." He handed me the sheet. The text was typed, neat and precise. I read it under the dim office light. "The rules for the night caretaker. Upon starting your shift at 10 p.m., you must greet the bride mannequin by name. Hello, Eleanor. Do not take your eyes off her until you have locked the main door behind you. At precisely 3:33 a.m., a music box on the desk will begin to play on its own. While it plays, you must not, under any circumstances, look at any of the security monitors. You hear the sound of tapping on glass coming from the children's corner. Go to the staff kitchen and make a cup of hot chocolate. Leave it on the small table in the center of that exhibit. Do not wait to see what happens. You may occasionally see the Jester figure appear in places it shouldn't be. He is a wanderer. If you see him, simply say, 'Lost again, are we?' and he will return to his pedestal by the time you next look. Never show fear. If the lights in the main hall ever flicker and turn red, hide under the steel desk in the office. Close your eyes and do not come out until the lights return to normal, no matter what you hear." I looked up from the paper, a confused smile on my face. "Is this a joke?" Mr. Alistair's expression was as lifeless as the figures outside. "You will be paid $5,000 a week, in cash." "Does that seem like a joke to you, Mr. Henderson?" My smile vanished. $5,000 a week. That wasn't just a lifeline. It was a winning lottery ticket. For that kind of money, I'd greet 1,000 mannequins. I'd make them a 5-course meal, if I had to. "No, sir," I said, my voice suddenly serious. "I understand perfectly." "I hope so," he whispered, his gaze drifting past me to the silent figures in the gloom. "For your sake." He showed me the small staff kitchen and a bathroom, then led me back to the office. "The first week's pay is in the top desk drawer. I will see you in 1 week." And with that, he walked to the main door, slipped out, and pulled it shut, leaving me alone in the immense, silent tomb. The clock on the wall read 9:58 p.m. My first shift was a masterclass in psychological torture. The silence was the worst part. It was so absolute, so heavy, that my own breathing sounded like a storm. Every creak of the old building, every hum of the fluorescent lights in the office was amplified into something sinister. And then there were the eyes. From my glass-walled office I could see them. Hundreds of pairs of unblinking glass eyes, all seemingly fixed on me. At 10 p.m., my phone alarm buzzed. It was time. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt ridiculous, but Mr. Alastair's dead serious tone had gotten under my skin. I stood up and looked towards the main exhibit. Standing on a pedestal near the door was the bride Eleanor. She was beautiful in a decaying sort of way, dressed in a once white gown that had yellowed with age, a dusty veil covering her face. "Hello, Eleanor," I said, my voice feeling small in the vast space. I kept my eyes locked on her as I walked backward to the main entrance, fumbled with the heavy deadbolt, and slid it into place. The sound of the lock clicking home echoed like a gunshot. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and turned away. For a few hours, nothing happened. I sat at the desk, trying to study for an exam, but my eyes kept flicking to the monitors, to the static, silent figures. The second night was when things changed. I just settled in, the initial wave of anxiety having subsided into a low thrum of unease. Around midnight I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. It was faint, but unmistakable. It was the sound of a fingernail on glass. My blood ran cold. I looked at the monitors, my eyes finding the one labeled Children's Corner. The little porcelain figures sat unmoving in their chairs and on their rocking horses, but the sound came again, clearer this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from that corner of the warehouse. Ruled Arm 3 slammed into the forefront of my mind. If you hear the sound of tapping, make a cup of hot chocolate. My rational mind screamed at me. It's the building settling. It's a rat in the walls. It's anything but what this insane list suggests. But the $5,000 in the desk drawer felt very real. And so did the cold knot of fear in my stomach. With trembling hands, I went to the small kitchen. I found the hot chocolate mix in a canister, exactly where Mr. Alastair said it would be. My hands shook so much, I spilled some of the powder on the counter. The whole time, the tapping continued. A patient, persistent rhythm. I carried the steaming mug out into the main hall. The air was colder here. As I approached the children's corner, the tapping stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. The small table was there, right in the middle of the exhibit. The painted-on smiles of the porcelain children seemed to widen in the dim light. I placed the mug on the table, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Do not wait to see what happens," the rule said. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and practically sprinted back to the safety of the office, locking the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my chair, staring at the monitor for the children's corner. An hour later, I zoomed the camera in as close as it would go. The mug was still there, but it was empty. After that, I followed the rules religiously. I never forgot to greet Eleanor. I never questioned the strange noises. The fear was a constant companion now, a cold presence sitting beside me in the office chair. It was on the fourth night that I met the Jester. I had been doing a system check, flicking through the cameras one by one. The Jester's pedestal was in camera 7's view, at the far end of the main hall. When I got to camera 3, which showed the aisle with the 1920s flappers, my heart stopped. He was there, standing silently behind a mannequin in a feathered dress. The Jester. His painted grin seemed wider, more malicious from this angle. He was 100 yards from his pedestal. Rule number 4. He is a wanderer. Say, lost again, are we? Never show fear, never show fear. It might as well have said, never breathe again. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I couldn't say it from the office. He wouldn't hear me. The rule implied I had to go out there. My legs felt like lead as I unlocked the office door and stepped out into the main hall. The Jester was exactly as he appeared on the monitor. A splash of garish color in the muted gloom. He was perfectly still, but he felt aware. I felt his glass eyes on me, even though his head was facing the other direction. "Lost again, are we?" I stammered, my voice a pathetic squeak. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I stood frozen for a long moment, my gaze locked on the terrifying grinning figure. The rule said he would be back on his pedestal the next time I looked. I had to look away, but the thought of taking my eyes off him was paralyzing. What if he moved? Finally, squeezing my eyes shut for a second, I forced myself to turn and look. Back at the office, I counted to 5, my heart hammering, before slowly, dreadfully turning back. He was gone. I whipped my head towards his pedestal at the far end of the hall. There he was, back in his designated spot, one leg bent, holding his silent scepter. It was as if he had never moved. I scrambled back into the office, my entire body shaking. The money didn't feel worth it anymore, but the thought of explaining why I quit was somehow just as terrifying. The nights began to blur into a single, unending stretch of dread and exhaustion. I was jumpy, paranoid. The highlight of my week was handing the keys back to Mr. Alastair. and collecting my envelope of cash, stepping out into the morning sun, feeling like a survivor emerging from a tomb. But then came the night I broke the rules. It wasn't an act of bravery, it was an act of pure, sleep-deprived frustration, a desperate need to feel like I was in control of my own sanity. I had convinced myself that it was all a series of elaborate tricks Mr. Alistair was messing with me, using speakers and magnets and who knows what else. The rule that gnawed at me the most was rule number 2. At 3:33 a.m., do not look at the security monitors. What could possibly happen just by looking? It felt like the linchpin. If I could just see what happened on the monitors, I could expose the trick. I could rationalize it all away. That night, I watched the clock on the wall tick towards 3:33 with a sense of defiant terror. I had a coffee in my hand, but it was doing nothing to calm my racing pulse. 32. I stared at the bank of screens, all quiet, all still. 33, right on cue. A faint, tinny melody began to drift from a small, ornate music box on the corner of the desk. I had never paid it much attention before, but now its cheerful, off-key tune was the most menacing sound in the world. Pop goes the weasel. My hand trembled as I reached for the mouse. My mind was screaming at me, don't do it. Just look away, get through the night. But the stubborn, rational part of me, the part that refused to be scared by a ghost story, clicked. The button. I switched the view to a 4-way split screen. For a second, nothing was different. And then, in the top left quadrant, in the Victorian dining exhibit, the mannequin of a man in a top hat slowly, jerkily, turned its head. A gasp escaped my lips. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a magnet. The movement was stiff, unnatural, like old wood, bending for the first time in a century. Then, on another screen, one of the porcelain children began to rock back and forth on its rocking horse, faster and faster. A flapper mannequin lifted its arm, its painted fingers curling into a fist. My blood turned to ice. It was happening. It was all real. I was about to look away, to shut it all down, when my eyes fell on the main monitor, the one focused on Eleanor. The bride. She was moving, not just her head or her arm. Her whole body was shuddering, her shoulders rising and falling as if she were taking a great rattling breath. And then, with a slowness that was agonizing to watch, she lifted her hands to her face. She took hold of the dusty veil. I knew I shouldn't watch, but I couldn't look away. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. She pulled the veil up, revealing the face beneath. It wasn't the calm, placid face of a mannequin. It was a nightmare. The plaster was cracked and warped into a silent, bottomless scream. The eyes weren't glass anymore. They were wide, dark pits of shadow, and they were staring directly into the camera, staring directly at me. At that exact moment, the main lights in the warehouse flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging everything into a terrifying, blood-red glow from the emergency lights. The music box on the desk stopped mid-note with a sickening crunch, as if it had been smashed. Absolute silence. Rule number 5. If the lights ever flicker and turn red, hide under the steel desk, close your eyes, and do not come out until the lights return to normal, no matter what you hear. A new sound cut through the silence. A low, heavy, dragging sound. Scrap! Scrappy! It was coming from the main hall, just outside the office. It was the sound of something heavy, something dead-weighted, being dragged across the concrete floor, and it was coming closer. I didn't think. I scrambled out of my chair and threw myself under the heavy steel desk, curling into the tightest ball I could manage. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands clamped over my ears, but I couldn't block out the sound. Scrap, scrappy. It stopped. Right outside the office door, I heard the doorknob, which I had locked out of sheer terror, begin to rattle. It wasn't a frantic human rattle. It was a slow, deliberate turning, the metal groaning in protest until there was a loud click. The door creaked open. I held my breath, my body rigid with a fear so profound it was paralyzing. I could hear the faint rustle of old, stiff fabric, the dry, whispery sound of movement. Something had come into the office. Something was in the room with me. I could hear it moving around, the scrape of its feet on the linoleum. I heard papers being pushed off the desk above me, fluttering to the floor, and then I heard whispers, not real words, just dry, sibilant sounds, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. They sounded like they were coming from multiple sources, from all around the small room. Time ceased to have meaning. I stayed balled up under that desk, eyes squeezed so tightly I saw bursts of color. My every muscle screamed in agony, but the fear was a cage, holding me in place. The whispers continued, sometimes seeming to be right next to my ear. I don't know how long I was under there, an hour, a lifetime, but eventually I felt a subtle change. A faint, gray light began to filter. In under the desk, the red emergency glow was gone. The main lights had returned to normal. The whispers had stopped. The rule said not to come out until the lights returned to normal. They were normal. Was it over? Was it safe? Slowly, painfully, I uncurled my body. My limbs were stiff and trembling. I crawled out from under the desk. The office was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere. The music box was in pieces on the floor, but the room was empty. I looked at the clock on the wall. 6:01 a.m. My shift was over. I didn't pack. I didn't take the money. I grabbed my keys, stumbled out of the office and ran. I didn't look at any of the mannequins. I didn't look at Eleanor's pedestal. I didn't look at the Jester. I just ran for the main door, my breath sobbing in my chest. I fumbled with the lock, threw the door open and burst out into the cool morning air. I never went back. I never called Mr. Allister. I dropped out of my classes, left my apartment, and moved 2 states away. I tried to forget, but sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear it, a faint tinny melody that isn't there, and I see them, in the dark corners of my vision. A flash of a crumbling lace dress, the manic grin of a Jester. They're just tricks of the light. I tell myself, just my mind playing games, but last night, I woke up in a cold sweat. I thought I heard a sound from downstairs, a faint, familiar sound that chilled me to the bone. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like it was coming from the kitchen.